that I'm an adoptee. People like Amy Coney Barrett like to use us adoptees as pawns in their anti-choice agenda. But I want to say proudly that I am an adoptee for choice. Adoptees are always told how lucky we are, how we were wanted, and how we should be grateful we were never aborted. They say that the adoption industry is the solution to women having abortions. I have been told this since before I can remember. This narrative is a lie. Adoptees suffer trauma, loss, mental illness, and are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. Adoption is not a harm-free alternative to abortion. Our society vilifies poverty and supports family separation. Out of mothers who relinquish a child, most have had 1 child already. Most mothers who give up their children for adoption want their babies and are forced into relinquishment by economic pressures. I am speaking on adoption and abortion rights because the women's struggle and the struggle for bodily autonomy goes far beyond just Roe versus Wade. Yeah. My entire life path was dictated by poverty under capitalism. My mother was a single mom of a 6-year-old who discovered she was pregnant in the last trimester. She hid her pregnancy out of shame and paralyzing fear, and finally told her mom and stepdad just days before giving birth. She traveled across the desert and gave birth to me in a hospital out of state. Nobody knew what to do when she told the doctor she couldn't possibly care for me. A nurse in the delivery room knew a social worker, and 12 hours later, I was being placed in my adopted parents' arms. As a newborn, I had no agency in this decision, and ultimately, neither did my mother. She is a working class woman, and every last ounce of her labor has been squeezed out of her entire life. I was then raised in a stable home out in the country and was told that adoption was God's plan for my life. But I don't believe God wants women to be cornered, alone, and desperate while they are pregnant. Y'all know who else is using the name of God to abuse women, deprive them of life-saving health care, and force mothers into relinquishment? That's people like Amy Coney Barrett and the undemocratic Supreme Court. During her hearing to become a Supreme Court justice, Amy Coney Barrett said that the burden of pregnancy no longer exists in our society because every state has places where you can anonymously abandon your baby in so-called safe havens. This is a slap in the face of women who have autonomy over their bodies. It also promotes family separation for poor mothers rather than social welfare. Not only does the Supreme Court claim that the burden of pregnancy no longer exists, the adoption industry is clamoring and desperate for new babies to be born and adopted out. There is what the Supreme Court calls a domestic shortage of infants. There are currently dozens of couples waiting for every single healthy infant that is relinquished. A white baby like me would cost $35,000, while a black baby would cost $18,000. This price difference is simply because of supply and demand. There is a market for these children, and the profit of lives like mine is at the expense of poor, working-class, pregnant women. Crisis pregnancy centers and adoption agencies have noticed a downturn in the number of adoptable infants over the last decade. This concerns them, especially when the CEO of an adoption agency on average makes $200,000. Here in the Empire, there are not enough babies to go around. In fact, adoption agencies extract the youth from impoverished countries to make up for this shortage, often using deceptive tactics. Crisis pregnancy centers and adoption agencies lie about a mother's rights when it comes to permanently relinquishing any legal rights over their child. They lie about the safety of abortion and they stigmatize women for having sex. But the most egregious sin of all is how they commodify parenthood and human life. Under this capitalist system, my mother was not given any resources to parent at all. Under this capitalist system, I cost $35,000. Under this capitalist system, my identity was sealed away, and I didn't see my mother for 20 years. When I finally met my mother, I found a family that was completely decimated by poverty brought on by capitalism. Then I woke up to the fact that the adoption industry had profited off my mother's misery, and this injustice has filled me with a rage that mobilizes me. Who benefited from my adoption? Who benefits when a child is placed in another family? Private adoption makes a profit off of infants, and our CPS system criminalizes poverty and the disease of addiction, and pays for other families to raise their children rather than helping mothers. In the richest country on earth, why are children being sold for profit? And why are rich families being paid to care for poor people's children? People say adoption is the alternative to abortion, but they are apples and oranges. Abortion is the alternative to giving birth. Adoption is the alternative to raising your already born child. Both decisions are often very difficult for women. The struggle for abortion access and child welfare involves the entire working class. Under this capitalist system, single mothers are more likely to be in poverty. Under this capitalist system, there is no social safety net for the working poor, even though their labor is the backbone of this country. And under this capitalist system, since 2020, birth rates in our country have drastically reduced. How many of y'all thought back in the pandemic and lockdown that we would have a baby boom? The opposite happened. As the rich got richer, the poor got poorer, and hundreds of thousands of lives were sacrificed for profit and the status quo here in America, families stopped having as many kids. A healthy society is one where it is possible to have a family. Every family needs food, formula, housing, and universal health care. Our capitalist system is crushing the dreams of families today. And I talk to many people who feel scared to have a baby because it's too expensive. In this system, adoption and abortion are both band-aids for greater systemic issues. Many women need adoption or need abortion because of the patriarchy, men's subjugation and abuse of women, and because of the poverty of women in capitalism. Many women who have relinquished or have exercised the right to choose did so for economic reasons. So in America, only the rich are free to raise their young or have abortion without condemnation from the state. This country needs healthy families. We need men and women who are prosperous, and we need to invest in fertility treatments and family planning. These are all things that we are entitled to. It is every individual's right to have a family and raise their children according to their cultural values. It is every woman's right to have a safe, legal abortion. And every last worker in this country deserves housing, health care, and the ability to live a life of peace and safety. The Democrats have refused to codify Roe into law. They have also refused to give people life-saving funds during a pandemic, during a housing crisis, and during economic crisis brought on by speculators. Our elected officials would rather spend their money on war than care for women, mothers, and children. Everything we see in society was made by the worker's hand, and every person on this earth has a mother who deserves to be safe, housed, and cared for. This movement is not just to demand that we codify Roe into law, it is to demand universal human rights for all. The struggle will continue until we are all truly free. The contradictions in our capitalist society create pressure, and this pressure leads to transformation. We will continue to fight for Roe versus Wade, and we will continue to fight for universal human rights and socialism. And we won't stop until we win.